Well, you're very welcome. We're glad to see you here. Thankful for this occasion that brings us together. Appreciate very much the worship that we've engaged in so far and the songs that we've sung together. That last song's a great song. It's a good reminder of something that an old fella put it in different words a few years ago. He said, you know, when God's people are united, the devil's got problems. I believe that's true. I believe if the devil can keep us fussing at each other and being petty and proud, and then his work's pretty well done, because the work of God is going to be greatly hindered. But if you have people, Christians, who love God and love one another, that's a tremendous blessing. We can work through a lot of problems that are going to come if we have that right spirit. So I do appreciate that good song, appreciate the prayers that have been prayed and taking the Lord's Supper together. Let me mention before we get to our passage, and we are going to begin this morning in the 5th chapter of Mark. Feel free to turn there. Make mention of something. We have been having on the fourth Sunday night of every month a young people's class, different homes after the evening service. And we've just restarted that, really. But we enjoy that very much, and I appreciate all those who are able to take part in that. And a suggestion has been made that we might move the day of the month around. There were some other opportunities to visit in the area, classes going on, and so the suggestion was made maybe we could move that from the fourth Sunday to another time. And I guess the second Sunday night would be a possibility. And I'm not opposed to that at all. I certainly understand. I think it's a good motive in mind to have as many opportunities as possible, other classes that may be going on. There's a little hang-up for this month because I think most of our folks are going to be going, or a number of our young people are going to be gone to some private camps that brethren run in a private way, not through the church, that is. And so that's going to be affecting us this second Sunday. But anyway, I bring that up to say maybe this month we'll keep it as is just for that reason, but in the future, to the parents who are involved in this work, is there a reason why the second Sunday will not work for you? If so, please get with me and let's talk about it and see if that is going to interfere with something or hinder you from coming. We want to try to do as much good and not harm with any movement of the date. So I just want to bring that up and ask you to help me with that if you would. But we'll try to keep it the same this time just because of that circumstance. But in the future, look to trying to find a date that will be the most accommodating for everybody. Mark 5 is an unforgettable picture. And I'm sure, like me, you're like me, it's one of the favorites. Mark 5, verse 1 begins this way. And they came over unto the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces. Neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him and cried with a loud voice and said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? I adjure thee, my God, that thou torment me not. For he had said unto him, Come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, My name is Legion, for we are many. And he besought him much that he would not send him away out of the country. Now there was there nigh unto the mountains a great herd of swine feeding. And all the devils besought him, saying, Send us into the swine, that we may enter into them. And forthwith Jesus gave them leave. And the unclean spirits went out and entered into the swine. And the herd ran violently down a steep place into the sea. They were about 2,000, and were choked in the sea. And they that fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country. And they went out to see what it was that was done. And when they were come to Jesus, they see him that was possessed with the devil and had the legion sitting and clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And they that saw it told them how it befell to him that was possessed with the devil, and also concerning the swine. And they began to pray him to depart out of their coast. And when he was come into the ship, he that had been possessed with the devil prayed him that he might be with him. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but said to him, Go home to thy friends and to them, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. And he departed, and began to publish in Decapolis how great things Jesus had done for him, and all men did marvel. It's a great story, an unforgettable story, and I want to make just a point or two about it. In the first place, you notice this takes place on the other side of the sea. The picture, the image here, is on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. That is, so many of the stories that surround Jesus' work in Galilee take place on the west side and on the north side in particular. And we're well familiar with places like Capernaum and Bethsaida and Gennesaret. But we're talking now about something that takes place down here on the south and maybe even on the eastern side of the sea. This is a great map. It's a little hard to read because of the smallness of the print, but it does give us a picture of the story here. You have so much activity that takes place. Capernaum became Jesus, in effect, his hometown for his ministry up there. Jesus had talked about all the teaching he had done in places like Chorazin and Bethsaida. On this particular occasion, if you read in the previous chapter, you remember how that the Lord is making his way with the disciples after a long day of teaching the parables. The famous parables that we all know so well had been taught the day before, and that evening, Jesus got in the ship with his disciples, was making his way across the sea when he encountered a great storm. A storm that scared the disciples so much they woke the Lord up. They thought that the boat was going to sink. And they woke Jesus up and he rebuked them and rebuked the wind. Why did you doubt? He said to the wind, Peace be still. They were amazed at all of that. And now they make their way down to the country of the Gadarenes here in the southern portion and the eastern portion of this sea. So here we are. And Mark says, this is the characteristic word of Mark, immediately, straightway. Immediately, as they come after a very eventful day before and night, they come to the shore. Along the shore would be caves, and in these caves many times would be makeshift tombs. And out of the tombs comes running to meet them the man famous as a wild man throughout that area. The text says he had an unclean spirit. Now that says something very specific. An unclean spirit is not to be misunderstood. Well, that can mean several things. But he's not talking here about a fellow who just has a dirty mind, for example. You know, the Bible does talk about people like that, people who are just corrupt and rotten on the inside. If you're here in Mark with me, just turn over to Mark chapter 7. And the Lord talks about certain ones who are rotten on the inside. He had told them that it's not what comes within, but what comes from without that defiles a man, but what comes from within that defiles him. And the disciples were asking about that. And he makes the point. He said in verse 19, let me start with verse 18. Are ye also without understanding? Do you not perceive that whatsoever thing from without enters into a man, it cannot defile him, because it enters not into the heart, but into the belly, and goes out into the draught, purging all meats. Verse 20. And he said, that which comes out of the man, that defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lasciviousness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. These things come from within and defile the man. I think it's the same picture that we saw recently looking at Ephesians chapter 2. In Ephesians 2, Paul writes about the state of those Ephesians before they had found the gospel. He said in verse 2 of Ephesians 2, wherein in time past you walked according to the course, the age of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. The atmosphere of this world has become your mind, the way you think and act and react. Look at verse 3. Among whom also we had our conversation, our lives in time past, in the lust of the flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind. Notice, and we're by nature the children of wrath, even as others. He's not saying that we're born in sin, but he's saying there are people who have through the years made sin a habit for so long that it's their nature. You know folks like that. You know people that just, they don't know how to live without stealing. They don't know how to talk without cursing. Just take God's name in vain. Don't even hear themselves do it. It's become their nature by long habit and practice. I think what the Lord would say in the passage we read a moment ago, he'd say, I'll tell you why they talk like that, because they're dirty on the inside. And until that's cleaned up, it probably won't get fixed. But I don't believe that's what we're talking about here. This fellow that comes from the tombs is not unclean in that sense. He has an unclean spirit. No. And he's not talking about sickness either, just physical illness. You could turn back over to Matthew chapter 4. You have here a little accounting of Jesus' work and his healing. And I think it's Matthew 4, I think in verse 24, that's what I'm thinking about. His fame went throughout all Syria. They brought to him all sick people that were taken with various diseases and torments. Those that were lunatic, that's an old word we don't use much anymore, moonstruck. Most people think he's talking there probably about something related to epileptic fits, palsy, paralysis, and those that were possessed with devils. In other words, in the New Testament, there's a distinction made between people who have a physical ailment merely and somebody who's possessed with a demon. Demon possession is something entirely different. It's something that is miraculous. It's something that is dramatic. Look in Matthew chapter 12, if you will. What it represents is a demon, an unclean spirit, actually taking possession of a human body and affecting it in various ways. Now, I think the Lord in Matthew 12 here and in verse 43 is probably relating something like a figure of speech or even a parable. When Jesus describes the unclean spirit gone out of a man, verse 43, And walking through the dry places, seeking rest and finding none, he saith, I will return unto my house which I came out. When he is come, he finds it empty and swept and garnished. And then he goes and he takes with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell therein. And he says the last state of the man is worse than the first. Now, be that as it may, just get the image here of demon possession itself. An unclean spirit being allowed to take up residence within a human being. It's a horrible thought. Let me make this point also, just since we're talking about this. These types of things were not common, and I do not believe they're things that go on today. They were allowed by God for a purpose. While you're in Matthew 12, look, if you will, in verse 28. Jesus had cast out a demon. And he said, some had said, well, he's working with the devil. That's how he can do that. And Jesus said, no, this the opposite is true. The devil is not silly enough to work against himself. He said in verse 28 of Matthew 12, this is a very important point, I think, in reference to this subject. He said, Jesus said, if I cast out devils by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God is come unto you. Notice, or else how can one enter into a strong man's house and spoil his goods, except he first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house? What's the point? This was a miracle. The demon possession was allowed for this purpose, that Jesus might cast out the demon. And what would that show? It would show that Satan is bound. It would show his supremacy over Satan. It would be an evidence, a confirmation of Jesus' claims and Jesus' word. You remember in Mark chapter 16, when he talks there about the preaching the gospel and the confirming miracles that the early Christians, including the apostles, used to confirm that word. He said, these signs, verse 17, shall follow them that believe. In my name shall they cast out devils and speak with new tongues and take up serpents. They drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick and they shall recover. These were miraculous signs, limited, temporary, and for a purpose. So then after that the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up into heaven and sat on the right hand of God. And they went forth, preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word with signs following. That word was confirmed. The point is, this is all a part of the initial revelation and confirmation of the Word of God. So if somebody comes up to you, or maybe you're watching some silly television show and it wants to talk about demon possessions and demons in the house and go hire an exorcist, all that nonsense. This is not something that God allowed to continue on and on. The gift of casting out demons is no longer needed or given, and the possession of demons, in the sense we're talking about, is no longer there either. We do find folks who've got pretty rotten on the inside, but that's not what we're talking about here. This man is a victim of a demon possession, and he likewise is going to be freed that Christ might be known, that his word is true and his claims are true. Notice how it affects this man. It's just tragic. It's one of the saddest pictures we see in the Scriptures. He's dwelling there among the tombs. He is acting in ways that are outrageous, ways that are uncontrolled and wild. He's a threat to himself. He's a threat to those around him. They tried to capture him and bind him, and chains won't hold him. And night and day he is in the tombs, the King James says, crying and cutting himself with stones. The word here for crying is the word krazo, transliterated K-R-A-Z-O. It looks a little bit like the word crazy. I'm not sure if there's a connection or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. The word actually means screaming, yelling. And so for years thought about that in reference to some sort of a mournful cry. There might have been a good bit of that as well. But this is the idea of a cry of agony. Cutting himself with stones, the idea of doing himself harm. It's a sad, sad picture. By the way, I believe it could be said, if the devil had his way, this would be everybody in this room 24 hours a day. If the devil was not restrained, if he just had his way, this is what you'd be every minute of every day, and your children. But the Lord's got a different plan. Jesus comes, and this demon sees him afar off and worships him. What a strange thing. It looks like to me to be hiding from Jesus. And I don't know why it is. But you see this over and again. Look back in the first chapter of Mark quickly. In Mark chapter 1, they're in a synagogue in Capernaum. And there was in their synagogue, this is Mark 1:23, a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out. And he said, "Let us alone. What have we to do with thee, thou Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know who thou art, the Holy One of God." In chapter 3, in verse 11, same thing. Another occasion. He had healed many. Verse 10 says, "Insomuch as they pressed upon him to touch him, as many as had plagues and unclean spirits, when they saw him, they fell down before him and cried, saying, Thou art the Son of God. And he straitly charged them that they should not make him known." There was something that compelled these demons in the presence of Jesus to run to him, but not to attack him, but in abject fear. What was it that James wrote about the uselessness of faith alone? He said, "Believest thou in God?" He said, "Thou doest well. The devils also believe and tremble." The demons are afraid of Jesus. But they are compelled by something to run to him and to acknowledge themselves and to beg for more time. "I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not." There's a torment that's coming, and the demons know it well. Jesus in Matthew chapter 25 had talked about the place of torment. And there'll be human beings that will find their way to that place of torment. But the Lord made it plain that that place was originally conceived, Matthew 25 and verse 41, the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Let me tell you, the devil knows what he's got coming, and the demons know what they've got coming. And these demons, in the face of Jesus, they just beg him that today is not the day for them. And so the Lord asked him, "What is your name?" And they say, "Legion, for we are many." I don't know how many there were. He doesn't tell us. I know there were 2,000 hogs in this story. You reckon there were 2,000 demons? That'd be many. The word legion has really a connotation that goes back to the Roman army. In the Roman army, a legion was more than 6,000. I don't know. I don't know all that. If he told me, I wouldn't be able to understand it all. Legion, for we are many. So they said, "Send us into the swine." At first they said, "Don't send us out of the country." We've looked at this before, I'm sure, at some point. That word country is an interesting word. I think it's in the modern speech translations that way too. The word is korah. And it's a word that essentially means the space between two places, the territory. And I think the territory he's talking about is this realm, earth. In other words, the demons desperately did not want to go to the realm that they knew well. If you look back in the book of 2 Peter, there are a couple of references in the scriptures to the dwelling place of the demons. In 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4, Peter makes this point. He says, if God spared not the angels that sinned, I think those are the demons. I believe that's true. If God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down into hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. The word there, hell, is not Gehenna. I don't think this is the final state of the demons. The word is a word only used here, Tartarus. And it's a special term that describes this place of waiting, this place of holding, this place of punishment for the demons. In the book of Jude, there's one other reference along this line. You remember in the 6th verse of Jude, he makes a similar point. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. The sin of the angels was getting out of their place. He hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. They're waiting for their time in Gehenna, but until then, they are in Tartarus, described as a place of darkness, a place of chains, awaiting the judgment. So there's the realm of the holy, there's the realm of God's faithful. That certainly doesn't belong to them. There's this place which is theirs by their choice and by right. And then there's the space between two places. It was considered to be a blessing, I guess, to a demon to be in this place rather than the chains of darkness. And they besought Jesus, don't send us out of the country. Well, he's not going to let them stay in this man. So what can they do to avoid going back to this place and stay in the country? Well, there was a herd of swine feeding nearby, and they besought him that he would send them into the swine, that we may enter into them. Somebody might ask the question, why in the world would they want to go to the swine? Recognizing that they were going to just very shortly after that, the swine were going to die, and they'd still be cast back, I'm sure, to Tartarus. Why would they ask for such a thing? Why would Jesus allow it? I think Jesus allowed it because he knew what was going to happen. And I think they asked for it because they didn't know what was going to happen. I guess they thought they could control those swine just like they controlled men, but it turns out they couldn't. And what happened, what resulted was that some smart aleck years ago said, now you talk about deviled ham, this was deviled ham. But these demons now possessing these swine found they couldn't control them. They ran violently over the cliff, as it were, into the sea where they were all drowned, disembodied, and thus, I suppose, back where they were to start with, out of the country. By the way, you can find, I haven't been over there, but they tell me there's several spots, or maybe a couple of spots that look like pretty good candidates for where it was in this country that they may have gone over into the sea. It would have been quite a sight, unforgettable for those human beings who saw all those animals drowned into the sea. Well, let me make this point before we go further. You know, I think what this story represents and what this particular aspect of the story represents is the fact that the demons were simply outwitted by Jesus and they were outmaneuvered by him. And I think that's a good microcosm for the whole picture. You know, the devil thinks he's so smart. He thought that rebelling against God would bring him all this success, but it didn't. He's a colossal failure. And I think about the failures of Satan through the years. We don't have time. Our time is about up, really. But you know, a couple of examples. I used to read the book of Job, and I read people who wrote about Job. And they would talk about this great test of Job and how that Satan found Job and put him to the test with God's allowance, but Job won, and that's all true to a point. But, you know, it was a while before I noticed, if you go to the book of Job and you ask this question, Did Satan ask God about Job, or did Satan ask God about Job, or did God ask Satan about Job? It's the latter, isn't it? It was Satan that was presented with the quality of Job. And Satan must have thought, man, this is my chance. I'm going to run this guy and I'm going to win this great victory. I think God all along knew that it was going to be the opposite. He was going to be shown to be a failure again. And that even Job would come out of this better because of all, and not to mention all of us that have been blessed by this great story. Satan thinks that he's smarter than God and he's on top of, and he's just like these demons going under the water in the pigs. That's what he is. The greatest example of that, of course, I'm sure is what you think about if you look over in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, when Paul is making a point about the plan of salvation. He quotes Isaiah, "Eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for them that love him." And I believe the application he makes of that is in reference to God's great plan to save man. And his plan to save man was for Jesus to become man and to die on the cross for our sins. And he makes the point here that it was a plan which none of the princes of this world knew, verse 8. For if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Can't you just see Satan just patting himself on the back saying, boy, I've nailed the Son of God to the cross. How smart am I? Yeah, how smart he is. So it's just a good reminder to me that the devil is always 3 steps behind. And he's full of bluster and he wants to make you think that he's as smart as God or he's just like God. And he's no such thing. He's a creature. He's desperately misguided and he's a failure. Don't join him. You've joined the wrong side if you join him. Anyway, let's finish up the story. So the reaction now of those people there who saw what happened is told. Those that kept the swine, they flee into the city and tell it everywhere in the city and in the country. And those folks come out to see, and they do see. They see this man who formerly was legion, demon-possessed, wild, famous throughout the area, and now he's sitting there clothed in his right mind. And it was told them what happened to him, what happened to the swine. People say, I want to know what happened here. Here's exactly what happened. But information doesn't fix every problem. And it didn't in this case. Let me tell you, when they were told, their reaction was they were afraid. And then their reaction was, we just wish you'd leave. They couldn't make him, could they? They said, we don't know what kind of power you've got. You've got some great power, and we just rather you go somewhere else. You know, there's still people who feel that way about Jesus. They can't wait. Oh, I want to know. I just want the truth. Here's the truth. Oh, okay. I didn't want that. This is a problem. There are people who will see Jesus and will say, no, thank you. We think about all the folks who haven't seen him and we need to tell them, and that's right. But there are people who will see Jesus and they will say, no, thank you. They ask him to leave. And here's the amazing thing. In verse 18, he leaves. And yet that shouldn't be too amazing, should it? Because in point of fact, that's what Jesus does when human beings reject him. He doesn't force himself. There's a story in Luke, the 9th chapter. Another place, another time. But as he's making his way to Jerusalem, he comes through the territory of the Samaritans, and they recognize that he's not planning this time to stay and to teach them and be with them, but rather he's making his way on to Jerusalem. And of course, the Samaritans and the Jews didn't get along very well, generally. And so they don't receive him. That's what verse 53 says. And that's when verse 54, James and John saw it, and they said, Lord, Wilt thou that we command fire to come down from heaven and consume them, even as Elias did? And Jesus said, you don't know what spirit you're of. The Son of Man has not come to destroy men's lives, but to save. And they went another way, another village. You know, I can just stand up and tell Jesus, no, thank you. I can hear the gospel preached and I can say, not for me. I can just close my ears and refuse to hear anything about it. That's my prerogative now. But the day will come when I wished I'd done something different. But the Lord does not force himself on any man. He gives us the choice. And we can see and be afraid, or we can have a holy fear that leads us to obedience. That choice is ours. One more point we'll make from this passage. And it's the man that was healed. It's the man formerly who had been the host of this legion and who is thankful in words we can't describe for being relieved from this terrible, awful affliction. As Jesus prepares to leave, he asks, let me go with you. And the Lord says, no. And he said no with this thought in mind. He said, I want you to go to your friends and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee and hath had compassion on thee. Don't you think that's our work? What a great point. You know, it's interesting. If you look back again in the book of 1 Peter, we were reading from Peter a moment ago, and in 1 Peter, there are a couple of passages here that talk about our relationship with our friends. and the point is that's made, I think, is that our example in standing up for Christ can have different effects on different people. In chapter 4, for example, there are some who will think it strange, verse 4, that you run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of. If you stand up for Christ and you let Jesus live in your life, I don't mean just be baptized. I don't mean just be a member of the church. I'm talking about you're on fire for God. That's what we ought to be at any age. But here's this person who is on fire for God, a young person, for example. And Christ lives in them, and they can't help but talk about it and think about it, and it affects everything that they do. Let me tell you, there's some people who will be put off by that, and who will say, I don't even know you anymore. You're acting crazy. Okay, well, can't win them all. But I'll tell you, with other people, it will draw them closer to what they want to know, what you know. They want to know what's different, what it is that's made you different. Look in the 3rd chapter of 1 Peter. Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asks you a reason of the hope that's in you. You're not terrified by trouble as you used to be. You don't go where you used to go. You don't think and talk like you used to. What is it that's changed in you? And you can tell them. That's what happened to this man. Tell them about the compassion God had on you, and he did. And all over Decapolis, all over that region, this man and his example spread the word of Christ. And I think the Lord would challenge each of us to do that same thing. In your family, in your neighborhood, at school, at work. Let Christ shine in you to the point where people see it. And there'll be some honest hearts who want to know, how do I get what you have? And you can tell them. It's a great story. Mark 5 is a favorite passage, and I hope that this reminder has been useful to you. If you would, please take your songbooks and turn to the number that's been selected. If it be your desire to obey the gospel of Christ this morning, no better time than now. If you're here as one who is a child of God, if the Lord has not lived in you as he should, if you've not let him live in you as he should, why not today make a change? And if we can help you in any way, let us know how. As we stand and as we sing, will you please come? There's a fountain freezes for you.